So I'm going to present Jupytext. Jupytext is a project to represent Jupyter Notebooks as simple text files, and we'll see the reason for doing such a transformation of Jupyter Notebooks. The outline of the talk will have an introduction on Jupyter Notebooks. Well, I think it's not necessary to introduce Jupyter Notebooks, but we'll also briefly discuss their representation. Then we'll spend most of the time doing demos of Jupytext. I think that's the best way to describe what Jupytext is and what it can do. So we'll see how to refactor a notebook. We'll see how to use Jupytext from within Jupyter. That's very convenient. And we'll see how to collaborate on notebooks. I don't know if you ever tried to collaborate on a Jupyter notebook, but that's not very easy, and actually that's the use case that brought me to write Jupytext. Then we'll discuss the other formats, because in the demo I'm going to demo just one format for notebook, but actually we have multiple formats. And I will conclude with a mention of a few related projects. So the introduction, just a word about capital fund management is where I work. So we are based in Paris, but we also have offices in very nice cities, New York, London, Tokyo, Sydney. We have 10 billion in assets under management and more than 200 collaborators. A fraction of them have a PhD and are doing research. I am one of those, and you can, if you want to have an idea at what we are doing, you can go to our website. You will find on the website a few of our publications. So yeah, we have white papers and more involved publication, and we also host meetups. We had a meetup recently, and we have opportunities also if you want to join. Now. Jupyter Notebooks, of course you know what Jupyter Notebooks are. I think they are a great support for exploring data. Exploring data in Jupyter Notebook is probably the best way. You have your code and you get the result right behind it. It's also a great environment for writing reports. Either a report you're doing a single time or something you want to do multiple times, and also for writing documentation. Then you can share notebooks. There are multiple ways you can share notebooks. You can send them as a PDF or HTML over email. GitHub will display notebooks nicely, just like the Jupyter Notebook viewer. And you can, if you don't know the last one, you should have a look. You can execute notebooks online for free. Well, the demo notebook is available on a binder if you want to run it. Now, when you open a Jupyter notebook with another text editor, that's what you get. So you get a huge JSON file, and I see two issues with that. So the first one is my input was this, right? I have inputted some a markdown cell, and so you see it's a markdown cell. A Jupyter notebook is just a sequence of cells. So I have one cell here, and it contains some text. But you see there's also a lot of metadata on the notebook. And I also have the outputs right after. So I have a next cell that injects some JavaScript, because I'm doing Plotly graphs, so that's a JavaScript library. And I will have 2.5 megabytes of JavaScript library in my notebook. So it's very difficult to edit manually. These are the two issues I see with the current format of a Jupyter notebook. when I started collaborating with a colleague on a Jupyter Notebook, I thought that the JSON format was not the best for collaborating. If you try to merge a Jupyter Notebook, it's not easy. I will show there are tools for doing that, but I tried without them and it was very difficult. So I had the idea to turn Jupyter Notebooks into text files. So that looks a bit surprising because the Jupyter Notebook, you think of the Jupyter Notebook as something very interactive with plots and widgets. Just to tell, we have a solution. We're not going to lose the outputs nor the widget. It's perfectly compatible with advanced usage of a Jupyter Notebook. And what we promise with Jupytext is text representation focused only on the inputs, only on the part of the notebook that you have written and you want to version control. That will make version control easier. You don't need to filter the outputs of the notebook, and you will be able to merge contribution of a notebook. You will be able to combine easily two notebooks, and you will be able to extract parts of a notebook and copy into another notebook. So now I told you so many things that I need to demo them. So we go to the part of the demo. So that's probably the most difficult part for in this presentation. Hopefully it will work. So as I mentioned earlier, the material for this demo, in case you want to redo it later on, is on this repository. So the demo is, so I had to do the demo on a Jupyter Notebook, so I chose the subject which is in the news. So it's carbon emissions, and there recently was a release by PwC. So they released their 2018 publication saying that while we're not quite meeting the target for reducing CO2 emissions, and they talk about decarbonization, so I'm going to illustrate what decarbonization is, but they say that if we do nothing, then we'll run out of a CO2 quota that we had reserved for the next century in only 18 years. And so that's, this is a plot of carbon emissions. So you see in the 60s we were emitting 10 million kilotons of CO2 per year, and now we are emitting 3.5 times that. So that's fairly impressive. So I just want to show you how we can access to this data, and we'll have two. Well, this is the notebook that we will use in the demo. So there will be 3 demos actually. So first demo is about refactoring. So we have a first character. We have 2 characters in the demo. So first one is Alice and the second is Bob, like in cryptography. So Alice authored a notebook with an introduction on greenhouse gas emissions, and she downloads some data from the World Bank. And then she will convert the notebook to a Python script. She will refactor the Python script using IDE, and she will update the input cells in the original notebook. So that's what we are going to do now. So this is the script for the demo. So at the start of the script, I have documented the Python environment for the notebook. So I will have to run all these commands in the shell, and so I worked on that a few weeks back, and a few days back I realized that actually I would love that script to become a Jupyter Notebook, right? It would be more convenient to execute this demo in a Jupyter Notebook with a bash kernel. So that's what we are going to do. I insist that the script here is a bash script, but you see it comes with a Jupyter Notebook icon in the Jupyter Notebook, right? So I'm going to open it. And that's my bash shell represented as a Jupyter Notebook. So that's one function of Jupytext to allow to open any script, a Python script, R script, bash script, C++, as Jupyter Notebooks. So for C++, I think I'm the only one to have tested, so more people should test. But for bash, it seems to work. And for Python, for sure, it works well. So I will run the demo. So the difficult part in the demo is that I have some manual, I have to act manually. It will not be enough to run the notebook. So first thing I'm going to do is to create a Git repo locally to trace the changes. So I do that and I init my repo. And we go to Alice's initial contribution. So initial contribution is a Jupyter Notebook with a data file, because downloading the data from the World Bank takes a while. So I have copied the notebook to the demo folder. Okay, so now we have these two files. And so the demo says I should open this file. So Alice has just contributed two sections, an introduction with a quote of a PwC report, and she also documented how to access the data from the World Bank, and for that there's a WB data Python package, which is very convenient, but unfortunately it's a bit slow. We are going to extract a certain amount of data, so I prefer to use a function, this function, to download the data just once and then to cache it to a file. And the file is there for the purpose of the demo, just not to wait a few minutes. Good. And then I have a list of indicators that I found on using the search page of the World Bank. So we're going to download population, we're going to download CO2 emissions. So we're going to download population, CO2 emissions, and also GDP. Because we'll see, I think that GDP is the main driver for CO2 emissions. Then we download the data to a data frame, and it has a multi-indexed. One is the region, and the second one is the date. So I've just plotted below the data for the world, and so you see we have population from the 60s to now, and we have many metrics. And that's all what Alice did, and then she just contributed a few more helpers, and she injects the Plotly JavaScript library, because she knows that she's going to work with Plotly and Bob as well, so I need that in the command part. I will run the notebook because I've not done that yet. I want the Python variables to be set. Because it's important to understand what's the relationship, what's the interaction between Jupytext and the Python variables in your kernel. Good. So I've run the notebook. I save it. Okay, so I've done this. I run the notebook. Now I convert my notebook to a Python script. And well, we've just done that. I go to my IDE, and I want to give you a brief overview of this file. So this is the Python representation of my notebook. So what comes first is an extract of metadata of the notebook, for 20 lines. Then you see I have my markdown cells, which are just commented to, it's a commented markdown. It was not changed otherwise. And I have my imports were quoted with hash plus. This is not always the case. This was the case because I had empty lines in my cell, and so I need to mark the cell with that marker. Now I have my method to download just once the data, and that and then we have the end of the notebook. You see the indicators and defining. So this is a script that I could run and even debug in PyCharm. I could put a breakpoint there and I could execute the script. It will do the same as the notebook. Unfortunately, PyCharm will not show the JavaScript graphs, but if I was doing that with Matplotlib, I could also see the plots in PyCharm. I go back to the demo. So I'm going to commit this to version control. And the next step is to refactor the script. So I told you I could refactor Jupyter Notebooks, so that's what we are going to do. I go back to PyCharm. I can circulate through code. I'm going to circulate to the definition of a method, something I cannot do easily in my Jupyter Notebook. And I want to refactor this method. Say I want the path argument to go to the second position. So I just move the path argument to the second position, and I save. Okay, I'm going to show you the changes in the version control. I've refactored the method and I've switched the order of the two arguments, and that's nothing impressive, but just I'm able to act on that script with an IDE or with any Python tool. Good. I want now to re-inject that change. Where is that? I want to update my Jupyter Notebook. So I run this. And here I did that with the update flag. If you don't put the update flag, then the Jupyter Notebook will be replaced. But in that case, it was just updated, and outputs were preserved when possible. Let me show the Jupyter Notebook. So actually, this one, it has not changed yet. Because Jupyter, the notebook is in memory. So I need to refresh. I'm going to refresh the web page. I do Control R, and I refresh. And now you will see that this cell is not marked as executed anymore. The second cell did not change, so it is marked as executed. And interestingly, this fourth cell is the output is still present because it was not changed. And so the output is present, and also if I run it, the variable is still there. So the variable were not changed. So if I run this, it's not going to work because the arguments were switched, but it's not the up-to-date version of a function. So I need to execute the first cell, which I do, and I will rerun this cell. Now I have a correct definition of a function, so that should work, and the data is still correct. Good. Now I save this. So what's next? So we did that. So I can commit. Okay, so I committed the change. I'm going to show you how they look like in GitHub. So this you saw already. The changes on the Python representation are very clear. And if you have a look at the changes on the Jupyter Notebook, well, they are clear as well, but they occur on the JSON representation. So every line is inside quotes and has a comma after it. And also there's some extra noise due to the number on the cell in the Jupyter representation. So of course, a good version control of Jupyter Notebooks, you should at least remove the execution count and the outputs. But well, you see already that this representation is clear. Now I want you to have a look at the size of the notebook. So you see there's a huge difference, a factor of 1,000, between the size of the notebook, because in the Python representation of the notebooks, we've extracted only the inputs. So it's 5,000 bytes versus 5 megabytes. Good. I go back to my slides. So the second demo, so in the first demo we used Jupytext command line. In the second demo we are not even going to the command line. We're going to use Jupytext directly in Jupyter. For that, you configure Jupyter Notebooks, you change your Jupyter Notebook config, and you just add a single line. You tell Jupyter to use Jupytext Content Manager. Then you need to restart Jupyter Notebook or Jupyter Lab. I'm doing the demo in Jupyter Notebook, but that works well as well in Jupyter Lab, except for one step that I will discuss later on. And then once you've done that, then any Python script or any Bash script or R script, etc., you can open any script as a Jupyter Notebook if a language is implemented. But we have Python implemented there. We'll see also in the second demo the concept of paired notebooks. So I told you in the before starting the demo, so we are going to have a text representation on the notebooks with inputs only. But of course, I don't want to lose my widgets. I don't want to lose my outputs. So for that, a collaborator that I met on GitHub had an idea, and the idea was to pair a traditional IPyNB notebook with a Python script, or with a text representation. So it works in the following way. So you work on the notebook in Jupyter, as you always do. But when you want, you're free to edit the Python script in your favorite editor. And then you will refresh the notebook in Jupyter. And what happens when you refresh? The input cells are taken from the Python script, and the output cells are taken from the Jupyter notebook. So the same thing already happened with a command line script. So this, it's just automatically implemented. So how to activate paired notebooks? We'll do that in the demo. You just need to open the notebook metadata and add this entry. So that's well, that's not very difficult, but it's not super convenient neither. So hopefully, in the long term, we'll have a button for that. And so this is the part that is not easy to do in Jupyter Lab, because you will have to go to the JSON representation of the notebook and to find the metadata and to add that yourself. It's simpler in the Jupyter Notebook. Also, a good idea is to deactivate Jupyter's autosave by running %autosave 0 in a cell. I'm not sure you are aware, but Jupyter is going to save your notebook every 2 minutes. And if you want to edit the same notebook in another editor, then it can be a bit dangerous. Actually, it's not that dangerous because there's a safety. Jupyter will test that the timestamp of the file has not changed. So if you have been editing the notebook in your editor, and if you forget to remove autosave, then Jupyter will not override, and it will ask you if you want to overwrite or reload. Good. So we go to the second demo. So this I have done, so I don't need to restart my Jupyter Notebook, but you should do that. I remove the Python script because I just want for now to keep the IPyNB notebook. And I will configure the notebook to become a paired notebook. So in Jupyter Notebook, that's simpler than in Jupyter Lab, as I just mentioned. So this is my metadata. I already have a Jupytext entry because I used Jupytext to update the notebook. So okay, you should not forget the comma at the end to get a valid JSON. I edit and I save. So when I save the notebook, this had the effect to create the two files, as I mentioned. So I'm going to commit that and to show you the effect on version control. So now we're using a paired notebook, so I just added that metadata to the notebook. And in the Python script, I also have this metadata. Yeah, so that's already the end of the second demo. We're going to see more of paired notebooks in the third demo. So the third demo is so Alice and Bob collaborating on the same notebook. So Alice is going to share the Python representation of her notebook. Bob will only get the Python representation, and it will open it as a notebook. Then he will contribute a few more plots, and he will also contribute a conclusion to the notebook. But at the same time, Alice has been working on her notebook, and she contributes an interactive application using IPy widgets. But they are working independently, simultaneously. Bob pushes first to the common repository, and when Alice wants to push, then there's a conflict. So we'll solve the conflict on the Python script, if everything goes well. So Alice contributes to the common repository, what she has just done. So Bob, so now we switch version control to user Bob. So I will close this because I'm not on Alice desktop anymore. And I will remove this notebook. Good. So now we are Bob, and we're going to open this script, and we will recover Alice notebook. So this is the same introduction, then the same we access the data exactly the same, but we don't have outputs because our outputs were in the Jupyter Notebook, and we just removed it. I'm going to restart and run to generate the outputs. Good, and I save. When I save, you see that this regenerates the IPyNB notebook. Okay, so this I did manually. I'm not going to remove another time. So we have 2 files again. Bob will contribute, but I'm not going to copy-paste a lot of cells by Bob into the notebook. So rather, I will update the Python representation on Bob. So that gives you an idea of how you can act on the Python script and then refresh the notebook. Good. So now I need to refresh the Python notebook, and we will also have a look at Bob's contribution. So let me refresh the notebook. Good. So Bob has added a new part on with plots and a conclusion, as I promised. You see that the initial cells were not changed in Bob's contribution, so we still have outputs there. We also still have the data, so that's important. I will not need to run these cells again. So now we are going to run Bob's part to generate the outputs. So his first contribution is the same plot we saw in the slide, so the evolution of CO2 emissions. Then he wants to compare with population and GDP. So we have a look at population. So population has been increasing by a factor 2 on the same time window. So he thinks that's not the main driver for CO2 emissions. And then he has a look at gross domestic product. So we have to be careful to take GDP in constant US dollar, because that one is inflation adjusted. So you see that GDP has increased a lot since the 60s. We are much more productive than we used to be 50 years ago. I think that's the main driver for CO2 emissions. So now we will explain the term decarbonization from the PwC report. So decarbonization is how much you need to emit CO2 per US dollar of GDP. So this, in gray, this is So this is the value for the world. So up to 2000, we've becoming more efficient at preserving growth and still emitting less CO2. But for the last 20 years, we've done nothing. So we should improve that. And actually, we've not done nothing, but maybe we have outsourced CO2 emission to from North America and Europe, which have continued to be more CO2 efficient per GDP, per dollar of GDP. So maybe we've outsourced that to other countries. So we should now outsource the improvements of CO2 emissions to other countries as well. And then Bob has a conclusion on what we can do. Well, I think it's another preoccupation, but maybe we should take a minute to think about this if we want to come at a Python conference in 20 years from now. Good. So now Bob saves the notebook. And so he has generated the outputs and the IPyNB file, and he will commit to version control. Let me show you how version control looks like. So we've added Bob's part, so that's very simple. We've just added content after the Alice contribution, but well, GitHub Desktop is not willing to show the diff on the Jupyter Notebook because the diff is too large. And we're going to end the demo with a demo on how to merge simultaneous contribution. So Alice has been working simultaneously, and she likes IPython widgets. So she So her contribution is again in a Python script, which I copy to here. I will refresh my notebook again to take inputs from the Python script. And you see that Alice's notebook is shorter because she's not aware that Bob has been working on the notebook. Still, she has contributed a metric explorer, so it's so I will run this part. I have all the Python variables to run this part. And it's I just have one drop-down widget, but she can. So I was explaining that we should not look at GDP in current dollar because that one is not inflation adjusted. So if you look at this one, it's very impressive, but it's a bit fake because it's not adjusted for inflation. Good. So she can explore. She has this metric explorer, and so we're going to save this, and we're going to integrate a contribution to a common project. So let me now we're going to rebase Alice's contribution on master. And there's a conflict. If you get that with a Jupyter Notebook, then you are in serious trouble. Actually, so we have a conflict on the Python script, which is expected, and we also have a conflict on the Jupyter Notebook. So we're going to resolve the conflict in PyCharm. So I like resolving the conflict here because I have conflict markers. So let me have a look at the markers. I have one marker here. It marks the introduction of Bob's part. So I'd like to introduce Alice's contribution here. Now I have two other markers. So here I have the start of Alice's contribution and the end of her contribution. So I will copy paste. I will remove this marker. I'm going to copy paste this at the location of the first conflict marker. Good. I'm also free to reformat my code because I don't know how many spaces, blank lines I have, and I want my code to be PEP 8 compliant. So I will reformat lines. Good. And I go back to my Jupyter Notebook and I will refresh. I will run into trouble here because I will explain why. Yeah, so Jupyter is not able to open the IPyNB file because that one has conflict markers inside and it's not a valid notebook anymore. So I need to close it. And I will have to delete this file. So if you do version control, then probably you don't want to put that IPyNB notebook under version control unless you want to keep track of outputs. So I'm going to delete this file. Anyway, it's not valid anymore. And I reopen my notebook. So I will have lost every output because of that. If I had not versioned the IPyNB file, then I would have preserved my local output. That would have been more convenient. So personally, that's how I work. I ignore the IPyNB file from version control, but still I have it locally to preserve outputs. I will run everything. And you see that we have Alice's contribution at this place, and then we have Bob's contribution. So we successfully merged two contributions to a Jupyter Notebook, and it was not too difficult to do the merge. Good. I save this, and we're going to finish the demo. So yeah, I'm still resolving the conflict, so I need to add the 2 files to finish my resolving my conflict, and I can integrate Alice's contribution to version control, and the demo ends here with. Yeah, so you see we have integrated Alice's contribution at this place, so you saw that already in PyCharm. Let me offer a wrap-up on the demo and also a word on what Jupytext can do. So you've seen that we can refactor notebooks using an IDE, but you can also refactor notebooks using scripts. Like you can make your notebook PEP 8, you can convert your notebooks from Python 2 to Python 3. Everything you can do on a script, you can do on a notebook with Jupytext. You can merge notebooks, and you can also extract part of a notebook and copy-paste to another one easily. You can do version control, we've shown that, and collaborate easily. You can use Jupyter as an editor for your scripts, just like we open the bash script in Jupyter Notebook. You can do the opposite. You can debug and run your notebooks as scripts in your IDE and put breakpoints. That's useful. And you can even think of running py.test, or you can even import a notebook using the Python representation. I'm going to tell a word on the other formats implemented by Jupytext. We've seen the light format, so I already discussed that. You can come back to the slide later if you want, but that's a light implementation. There are few markers in this representation. Another popular format is the % cells. When I first published Jupytext, I was not aware of well, I was not aware it was so important, but actually this is a format that is supported by 5 IDEs and editors, so you may want to use that one. And I would like to make a special mention of Hydrogen. There's a snapshot there. You can run the Python code, and not only Python, it's language agnostic, and get the outputs just behind your inputs, and it's compatible with JavaScript outputs. Good, I'm going to finish. There were a few previous projects previously to Jupytext. I'd like to mention, obviously, Notebook Diff and Merge. That's a Jupyter team solution for merging and diffing Jupyter notebooks. And you can also merge outputs. And if you can afford to work in the cloud, then you should give a try to Google Collaboratory. It's very impressive. You put a Jupyter notebook on your Google Drive, and you can collaborate real-time with other persons, so it's much simpler. So if you can afford working on your Google Drive, then it's much simpler than Git and Jupytext. Jupytext has been recently released on CondaForge, thanks to a collaborator, and we are looking for contributors for Jupyter extension. It would be simpler to configure Jupytext. Documentation, we have 2 blog posts in Towards Data Science, and obviously the README on GitHub. And I'd like to thank these people and also the person who gave all these stars on the project. And I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Marc. Any question?
Do you plan to support the pi% format by default?
Oh, well, that's a good question. You can change your configuration of Jupyter to use that format by default, but on the command line, currently the command line is not configurable per default. But in Jupyter, yes, you can use per default the % format. Live
offering the same, VS Code recently introduced live collaboration in the same worksheet, right?
Yeah.
what about supporting this functionality in now?
Well, it's a bit difficult for me to answer this question because I would say it's not safe to have two people sharing the same Jupyter kernel. Jupytext uses Git to exchange the source, but we are never going to exchange the Python variables. So I cannot answer with more details, but we can discuss that further.
We can discuss this.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the talk. Can you come back to the formats? I think there's a list of formats. So you talked about light and percent. There's others. Is there one that enables you to, instead of having the markdown in the comments, having a markdown file on one side and the Python file on the other?
Yeah, you can
kind of include it.
You can export to multiple formats that's supported, but just one of the formats will be the source. We'll take the source just from one format, and the syntax for that. So in Jupyter Notebooks, we've added two formats here, a Jupyter Notebook and then Python. You can put Markdown, whatever you want. You can put many. The world population notebook on our Jupytext GitHub is an example where we export to 4 or 5 formats. So the first format that is not Jupyter Notebook will be the one where we load the inputs from. So the order matters.
Last question, maybe? Okay, well, thanks again.
Thank you.